Hello and welcome, star people. This is APM, your intrepid star guide and cosmic detective, and we're going to do a quick recap. This is the Somerton Man mystery. We're doing the astrology of that mystery, in which on December 1st, 1948, at about 6:30 a.m., a man between the ages of 40 and 50 years old was found deceased with his head propped up on a sea wall, legs crossed and outstretched in Somerton Park Beach, Australia, which is near Adelaide. There are no details about who he is, where he came from. He has no identification, and he has very few items for which can help the investigation find out who he is and find out more about him. So that is where we were at as of that first episode. So the focus of episode 2, the second part 2 of this, is diving deep into our outer planets. Housekeeping: we have a daily Stargazer newsletter for if you want the cosmic vibe on the daily. Social media: you can find us at Instagram, Pinterest and YouTube, and those links will be in the show notes. And if you like our Astro Flow, please like, share and subscribe. Please give us 5 stars on Apple iTunes and Spotify so that other astro-curious people can find us as well. And now, onward. Okay, so we're going to be looking at Neptune. We're going to call that Neptune's Veil. So let's check out where Neptune is hanging out in this chart. See what is going on. And then we got Neptune at 14 degrees. It is co-present. Well, no, it's in the 10th house. The 10th house is public reputation. And it's at 14 degrees in Libra. And so Libra energy tends to be diplomatic. And here's the curious thing about this case. We need some diplomacy. Why? Because it's on in Australia in 1948, just after World War II, and tensions in that part of the world, and in the world in particular, were still quite sensitive, even 3 years after the war. So this is post-World War II. We still had some sensitive energies, and so when we're looking at 10th house, what does the case look like at this point? And so we're going to have to tread a bit lightly, diplomatically, but Neptune is about confusion, because we don't actually know 100%. So Neptune is about disillusionment, confusion, a fog. And basically this is a fog of mystery, because there's so little information about this person's identity that even over almost 80 years later, this case is still firing the imagination of amateur sleuths and investigators. Everybody's got a theory. And so when we're looking at this Neptune at 14 degrees of Libra, it's possible this might have some diplomatic implications, but we're not exactly certain, because Neptune is definitely very confusing. That means that Venus is the shot caller, and Venus is at 5 degrees of Scorpio. And what that is saying to me is that these two are not in what I would consider a powerful enough major aspect, at a major telomic aspect. As I said, 5 degrees of Scorpio. Venus is not in its strength in Scorpio. And we're looking at the 11th house. This is future. We're looking at future endeavors, and we're also looking at the present community. At that point in time, Scorpio energy tends to be very much about mystery, very much about the taboos. Taboos being talking about things, looking into things that other people would prefer that you not talk about or look into. And this case has plenty of that. So when we're looking at that in Scorpio, we're looking at the why of it all, the psychology of it all. And that Venus is, let me take a look, I want to make certain. Okay, so Venus would be calling it depositing, meaning we're going to find the planet that rules it. And so let me check out first to make certain that first things first, we've got Venus and Saturn at 5 degrees both. So that's pretty tight. They're in a sextile, which is potential. Sextiles you have to work on. Otherwise, they're not going to be blessings. If you don't put in the effort, it's not going to happen. So we're looking at a framework and to make sense of something that doesn't make sense, meaning a death that has few clues. And we're going to need to look under rocks, ask questions, and sometimes knock noses straight off people's faces, figuratively speaking, as we try to get the answers for this man and potentially his family and have closure. And so we have these two planets in a sextile, one in water, that's Venus, one in Earth, that's Capricorn. That energy is about foreign death, hidden details, and the impact it has on the community, which is mystery. It's a mystery. It's still very mysterious. Nobody knows what the hell happened. And so that tight little vibe is telling us about this hidden mystery and trying to blaze the trail, find a framework that best describes the facts as they understand them to be, thereby solving the case. So Venus and Saturn are forming a rather tight connection. Now Pluto enters into the game, and it's in Leo and is in the 8th house of its own home, so pretty strong connection. It's in its own home. We like that. 16 degrees. We like that as well. And it is forming a sextile to Neptune. And these are two outer planets. So we're looking at the 8th house. We're looking at death. And we're looking at we'd say fiery death. And I would say probably, this is hard to know. We're looking at poison, we're looking at all sorts of things, but the body's physicality didn't seem to have many marks on it. So what could this Pluto be telling us in its connection to that shocking, the manner of death, because you're always going to look at the outer planet by its house first, then you're going to look at the element. So the manner of death is a mystery. And Leo energy is playful energy, but it's also very authentic and expressive. And so the manner of death, we don't have anything to express. We don't have that kind of energy. What we do have is that Pluto going to Sagittarius Sun, which is in the 12th house. A death on what appears to be foreign soil with a potential person who may not be a national of Australia. Okay? And so Pluto in the house of death, this is a chart about discovery of a body. So, yeah, therein lies the mystery. Okay, so what we're looking at is missing information on clear identities. We also have Neptune, because Neptune and Pluto are talking about an unclear identity, unclear information about who this person was, because a public rep, how this case renders on the public is all 10th house, but Pluto is about the death, it's the gravedigger, it's the bone collector, and it's in the 8th house of death, so the identity of the deceased person is unclear. Now we're looking at Neptunian themes. We've got disguise, we've got illusion, we've got hidden identities. Well, first of all, you can probably gather that when people cut out the labels from their clothing, it might give the impression that someone's trying to hide something, maybe their identity. And if you further add to that energy that this person didn't seem to leave much of a trace wherever they were, because their whereabouts are a mystery. The timeline to this day is still very sketchy. Very little information on it. And illusion, okay, it's like he's very well dressed, but he seems to have very little on his person for a well-dressed person. In his pocket, he has a note from a book of poetry that says, "This is the end," or "it is over," that sort of thing. So it makes it sound very romantic, as it were. And so you might see the Neptunian themes of disguise, because this fellow seems to have gone quite a ways to not show where he was or how he ended up where he was. All that stuff seems to be shrouded in mystery, which is very Neptunian, and his identity hidden, which of course makes people think of spies. So the relationship to the mysterious book and the code in the back is what gives us Neptunian themes here. And let's look at a few more aspects. I want to stay as tight as possible. So Neptune doesn't have a ton of aspects in the chart. It has a tight one to Pluto, and that is it. All the others that I'm seeing are not tight enough that I'd want to introduce them into a podcast episode, as it might muddy the waters a bit. So we've got the hidden identity, we've got the lack of clarity, we've got even a lack of clarity around the means of death. Now let's look into Pluto's secrets. As I've stated, Pluto is in the 8th house. Let's check out its aspects and have a look at what it's doing. So it has a pretty tight trine. Well, I see a trine, but I don't like it, but I'll go with it anyway. So the tightest connection I can see between it and is with the moon. And the moon is 6 degrees off. And moon is about the victim. So hidden identity, the death, 8th house. Hidden identity, 9th house. You might also consider the sun to be about identity also, but I'm using it also to talk about authority, about the figure, which was a male, and the victim in the 12th house. So hidden identity, hidden cause of death. That's how I might read that. Now, we've got themes of power, transformation, and hidden knowledge. Why? Because we've got Pluto hanging out in the very house of transformation, where grief is allowed. That's another thing about the 8th house. It's also about grief, about loss, because someone lost this person. He never came home to somebody. Somebody must have missed him. At least that's the thinking that I'm currently going with. And so, these are some of those themes. Now, Plutonian themes also have Plutonian connections. And so now we go to espionage theories. And because his clothing suggested that he was not from Australia, there's a question of what was he doing in Australia? And the proximity to intelligence sites, or at least sites that would be mysterious and hidden, because no government wants you to know what they're doing on their own soil to protect themselves from foreign powers who may or may not be trying to infiltrate, and for nefarious reasons. So you can see how this, with all of its lack of a lot of questions and very little information, how we might get here. And so we've got espionage theories. And even at some point, when the Somerton man when people come forth, when they ask people, okay, did you see this guy? At some point, the Somerton man's, some of his personal effects appear at a railway station of all things, and someone comes forward and says, we've had this suitcase just sitting around, and do you want it? Because it should go back to it belongs to. It turns out the Somerton man left it at the railway station. Now, did he leave it there with the intention of going back for it, or did he leave it there to hide it? No one knows, which adds to those espionage theories. And then we have another character, the ideal Cold War character, because everybody keep in mind, this is the time also of the Cold War, where a lot of espionage, a lot of theories, a lot of secrets and mysteries and hidden things were becoming a commonality. Okay, as of 1948 and going on to 1940s, 50s and onward. So it is not beyond the pale. And then Russia appears to have a connection here, because one of their operatives, who people said was a spy, was in Australia at that point. And the curious thing about that is that when the Somerton man was found, we never, and by we mean the investigators and people in Australia, no one ever heard or saw that Russian agent or spy or what have you ever again. Never seen, never heard of again. But that doesn't necessarily mean he is deceased. It could mean that he simply went back home to his home country and laid low. Or it could mean that he was the Somerton man, because when I looked at the pictures, I thought, well, and other investigators looked at the pictures and said, well, he could definitely be the Somerton man. He's about the right age. He served time during World War II. He was knocking about in Australia for whatever reason. And it's possible. So this is how we get to espionage. We have two sites. One that produced radium, I believe, or uranium, and the other site, of quiet. And that quiet, secretive military installation, both of them doing whatever they're doing, because every country has that sort of thing going on. So you can see the espionage theories running amok all over the place. And if we're going to explore, let's look at the death through the Plutonian lens. We've got 8th house, grief, loss, and we've got it talking to Neptune, being all confusing. We've got Venus adding to it with all the whys, the psychological questions. Why would someone go so far to hide their own identity? Why would they do this? Why would they work so hard? Do they not want to be found, or are they running from something? Is it possible they're running from smugglers? Because that was not an uncommon thing. This is a beach area. It was not unusual for smuggling to happen in major thoroughfares or even waterways. I mean, if you're going to smuggle, you want an easy in and an easy out, and over water is usually a really good way to do it. Shipping is done still that way over boats, so it's a very good way to ship things in and out of places, if you're of a mind. Let's look a bit at Uranus. Now, let's check it out. Uranus is hanging out at the 29th degree, and it is in Gemini. And it's in the 6th house. The 6th house is about the daily investigation, how this investigation is being done on the daily. And if Uranus is involved, that means all the information is always going to be either revelatory or unexpected, meaning that they're not going to get the answers that they're hoping to get. They're always going to get that sharp left turn into maybe a blind alley, a dead alley, or it takes them a completely different direction. And things just stop adding up. So wherever Uranus is, it's always bringing the unexpected. Now at 29 degrees is called an anaretic degree, and it is important because it's the last hurrah of which a sign, a planet, is to get something right energetically. In the 6th house of investigations, it's always the unexpected, meaning the daily investigations from the finding of the deceased onward was always filled with the unexpected and quite a few shocks along the way. Now, Uranus is in Gemini, which means that Mercury at the 1st degree of Sagittarius, not a comfortable position for Mercury. And in the 12th house means a lot of hidden information. And some of this unexpected information, these unexpected shocks and upsets in the investigation, point back to questions that they still don't have answers to. And at the 29th degree, that means it would be conjunct the DC, and the DC is known as the descendant, is on the cusp of the 7th house. It is in Cancer, and what that basically means is that that's the other. And Cancer energy is home, belonging. And emotional intelligence. But what does that tell us about, the other here? Because Gemini, that'd be the daily investigation. Seventh house would be the potential criminal, if there is a criminal here. But it's at 0 degrees, and 0 degrees is also in itself a unique degree in that it is not actually any type of energy. Some people read it as powerful Cancerian energy, in that I would read it more as a cipher type energy. It hasn't yet announced its potential. It could be anything, it could be anyone, it could be anywhere. They could be anywhere, is how I would read a 0 degree descendant, because you don't really know anything. And you don't really know anything, you don't know anything. Literally nothing is how I would read that. Because that's why this case is so interesting, is because it gives so little of itself. And connections. So let me go back and we're going to see what else we have. We have an opposition to the ascendant, which is at 0 degrees Capricorn in the first house, recall. And that is with the descendant and also the shocking and unexpected energy of Uranus. And so that means we have a goal. We're driven to find the answers. We want to find out who this person is and what happened to him, and if he's got family, present closure for them and peace for his soul. And this investigation is filled with more unexpected, more shocks, more left turns, more blind alleys, and dead ends than you could possibly shake sticks at. Okay, so that's where we're at there. Now, looking at that, it could talk about another thing you can mention is connections to sudden discoveries and unexpected evidence, and that's where the suitcase comes in. Because when they find the suitcase, that is when they find the book of poetry. I mean, when they find the no, not the book. I'm sorry. They find the suitcase, and the suitcase has a few odds and ends in it. And it eventually leads them to eventually a book of poetry. And the book of poetry is the Rubaiyat, and they find that handed in by someone who said that someone threw it into their car, and so they give it to the police, and they do analysis on it, and lo and behold, it's the same book. Even has a page ripped out, so they know this is his book. And this book leads them to the first viable witness they have in the case, which is a nurse by the name of Justin, who lives in the area and possibly might know this man, because it is, as far as the police know, Nurse Justin gifted this Rubaiyat to our deceased person, our deceased Somerton man, and they just want to know when this happened. And it happened about 3 years prior, when they potentially served in the armed forces, and they met up about 3 years prior, and it was given as a gift. Now, it's a book of love poems. And that's a nice, unexpected twist. A book of love poems on a stranger with a code in the back. That's unexpected. This suitcase turning up top of the next year. And in addition to that, they're starting to find connections, unexpected connections. Like, for example, in 1945, someone else ended up deceased around that area, and it looked like poison, and it was possible that this person, they're wondering, might have had connection to smugglers as well. And they're wondering, does this have anything to do with the case? Because that person was present at the time when our nurse Justin was on a date with yet another suspect in the case, who definitely was an agent and known to be an agent, and they had a date, and that date whether or not it actually happened or not is also up for debate, because the male member of that date, that saw Nurse Justin, who gave the book of poetry to our deceased Somerton man, he said no. She'd given him a book of poetry as well at that 1945 date, which was on the property of yet another person ending up dead. And people are like, well, this is starting to look a little interesting. All these cases, and they all nothing. They don't have anything to do with each other. That seems strange. We don't think that's a thing that happens. And it looks also like Nurse Justin is not being terribly forthcoming. So as we move onward with the case, going on to 1949, when they do the inquest, they don't have any more information than when they started the case on December 1st of 1948. And so they close the inquest with, we don't know how he died, because most of the evidence that could have pointed them in any given direction, they didn't have the means, the technological means, or even the wherewithal to think maybe we should hold on to the cigarettes. The cigarettes, by the way, bit the dust. They ended up, they were thrown out. So we don't know if they could have been used as a means of poison, because one of the theories that I talk about in the first part 1 was that poisoning could have happened. By whom? Persons unknown. But those cigarettes might have told us a story. And then we have a Russian spy appearing into the story hereabouts. And then all of a sudden the suitcase, which is very Uranian, just magically appears from the railway station, and it brings with it more questions. There's precious little in the suitcase to begin with. And it just takes them back to Nurse Justin, who has apparently a habit, no judgment, of handing out books of love poetry to the gentleman that she fancies, which is fascinating. So that's another thing. They're like, okay, this love poetry book has been handed out quite nicely to a lot of people. What's going on with that? And so some of these things just keep coming back to the same person. And so around the inquest, they decide to make a cast of him, because decomp is a very real thing, I'm sorry, but it is. And so they want to preserve him so that in the chance that they solve the case, they'll still have someone to come and see him and identify him. So Nurse Justin is brought in to look at the bust that they've made from his body, and the investigators notice something curious. And the curious thing they notice is, it looks to them, seasoned investigators, like she actually might know this bloke. She might know this chap. And she says, I don't know him. I've never seen him before in my life. But she looks completely shocked, Uranus again, taken aback. And at one point, one of the investigators felt like he needed to position himself behind her just in case she fainted dead away. And he's like, all of them are thinking, that's an interesting response to someone you don't know. So it's possible that she knew him quite well and had a reason for why she didn't want to say that she knew him. And that is the unexpected. Sudden discoveries, tied to a case. Is this smuggling? Is that possible? Do people get poisoned for smuggling? This Nurse Justin having a connection to another potential suspect in the case, and a connection to the book of poetry which she gave to two separate people. And when asked to, do you know this fellow, saying, I don't know him, even though all the investigators in the room thought, nah, she knows him, she just won't tell us why. But why wouldn't she say who he is then, if she knows him? Wouldn't she want closure? Wouldn't she want other people to have closure? Maybe his family? So that's a curious part of the investigation. Now, Uranus also is about technological aspects of the investigation, and let's just be fair, 1948, there were not that many. moving into, I would say, Uranus in Cancer, we're moving more into gut instincts. At the 29th degree, we'd be trying to keep it as logical as possible, and that Mercury at the 1st degree of Sagittarius would be very big picture, but consider that energy of Sag is still in the 12th house of that which is hidden, meaning that we're speculating here. We don't have any ideas about what's really going on. And so, linking to modern breakthroughs in the case, it's basically still to this day trying to find unique ways to find answers. And that is what we're going to step into when we return for part 3. So, outer planets can illuminate case mysteries via consciousness, because they're about shifts in consciousness. And at that point, crime investigation was still nascent. It was still very, very much in the dark ages. They didn't have all the abilities we had now. They still had to do their due diligence, certainly, but they had to go with gut instincts. So when I see that Uranus in Gemini cozying up to that descendant of others at 0 degrees of Cancer, they are having to choose between whether or not they're going to look at that big picture, and most of that big picture is occluded. They're going to have to decide how much of their gut to trust and how much empirical data they can trust, given that they have so little empirical data to go on. So it's probably going to be going on what they think with their gut, which may or may not be accurate. So in part 3, we're going to explore more theories through the aspect patterns. And call to action here, Astro people, there is a newsletter. It's called The Daily Stargazer, and you can get your daily cosmic insights there. We are also, and by we I mean me and Outlaw Astrology, are on Instagram, Pinterest, and YouTube. Those links are in the show notes. If you'd wish to support the podcast with a one-time or ongoing donation, you can find that also in the show notes as well. And until next time, stargazers, keep your eyes on the stars and your mind open to the mysteries. Peace and astro magic.